We have straight up really damn good news today, and it's bizarre. EA, at one point they were voted the most hated company in gaming, right? You remember all of those campaigns against EA, all the Battlefront 2 stuff. They really did have one of the worst reps in the industry, at least per audiences. Workers actually found that they were generally pretty good, but still they did have their famous studio killing reputation. Now though, we're seeing things actually turn around. The Dead Space remake, quite simply put, is absolutely brilliant. And it overall does mean, really, EA's got to fix two things. Now, unfortunately, one of them is not going to happen. That is, making their sports games not be evil in terms of their monetization, which won't happen, and making Battlefield really be what it should again. And funny enough, on that, 2042 is getting good changes and good updates, and they're devoting a lot of resources to that franchise's future, and even quite a lot of Vince Zampella's time, which is rightly regarded to be a pretty damn effective thing. As for the new Dead Space, well, it's actually been absolutely brilliant. That's what's fascinating here. They've actually managed to pull off a Capcom, and in a world where we've seen, I think, quite a lot of disappointing remakes and remasters, this really does show us the way forward. And of course, it was in many ways Capcom that led that charge, and I'm sure there's a lot of people looking back at Blizzard Entertainment's Warcraft 3 Reforged thinking, God damn, I wish they gave it this treatment. To zoom back to 2008, Dead Space was an absolutely stunning game, in a pretty damn stunning year for Electronic Arts. You had Mirror's Edge, a really fantastic game, especially if you get deep into the speedrunning there. Fantastic game. Burnout Paradise, fantastic game. Battlefield Bad Company 2, fantastic game. It really was, as much as there were a lot of cracks brewing, something Command and Conquer, it was a pretty damn incredible time for EA. And this is a game that came from EA's Redwood studio, a studio that, funny enough, was pretty key to a lot of our childhoods. I mean, did you play the Lord of the Rings Return of the King tie-in game as much as I did? Like, that thing absolutely slapped. And Redwood Studios was actually then rebranded to Visceral Games. Visceral Games, of course, would meet a rather grim end, where they, had a pretty major part in EA's Star Wars, not really getting off on a good foot. And of course, Visceral, very sadly, was, gutted and destroyed. And really, much of the story of Electronic Arts going in the wrong direction, it kind of happens with Dead Space, Dead Space itself is a game that was a risky proposition back when it was first greenlit. In fact, it is Resident Evil 4 and that game's runaway success that led to the executives at an EA that very much was pretty a big fan of, the safe bet. Well, it was Resi 4 doing well that made them think, okay, maybe we can do a survival horror game. And it was fantastic. Dead Space 2 was also quite successful. It was a little bit more action-y, maybe a little bit more mass market, perhaps a bit more mass marketed, and not as successful, in large part because it was a more expensive game to make. But still, I remember really enjoying it. We then, of course, come to Dead Space 3, a game that is absolutely a major waypoint on Electronic Arts' path to a very bad place. That is the game that actually integrated crafting and resources with microtransactions, such that they managed to make something rather impressive, a pay-to-win single-player game. Yeah, not the sort of innovation that really any of us wanted in games. And of course, from there, that game didn't really do well. We all know why. Visceral, of course, would end up dying. And as Visceral died, we of course saw the BioWare magic finally break. We saw Battlefield have its ups and later its downs. And ultimately, a sorry state for EA. A sorry state that, funny enough, Capcom would partially help them out of with, I think, Capcom's incredible remasters, really remakes, of the Resident Evil franchise, providing EA with the blueprint, much in the way that Resi 4 actually spurred on the existence of Dead Space. Perhaps we can say that those widely successful Resident Evil games, the remakes, they've spurred on this. And it's quite funny because they played a broad role in the story that really was Capcom actually rehabilitating their franchises. I mean, they obviously had their humongous hits with the more modern Monster Hunter games, but with Resident Evil, I mean, do you remember the pretty damn bad reputation Resident Evil had and how amazingly they were able to rehabilitate that entire franchise? That is exactly, as it turns out, what Electronic Arts have been able to do here. And from the studio that is Motive. The studio themselves, are a little bit more new. Of course, they did the Star Wars dogfighting game that was, I think, what it said in the tin. That's what a lot of people wanted. And now for seemingly one of their first larger projects, we've got an absolute cracker of a game. Really brilliant. 90 critic average, 96% of critics recommending. And as an example, I mean, in me, they've won a complete evangelist. As an example, my girlfriend's really into horror. Didn't play this game back in the day. As soon as I have an apartment with working heating, because my boiler stopped working, this is what we will be doing. And I think this is one of those times where there are a lot of fans of that game from back in the day, as you'll find out, John Carpenter included, yes, that one, who will absolutely want to evangelize this game, and I think will be very thankful of a modernized, in a good way, experience. Right? And when you look at this, you broadly see critics saying that they are balancing innovation and renovation with preservation. I think some good words there from IGN. Broadly speaking, like, this is Dead Space, but good God, they've actually performed a Capcomification on it, and that truly is a remarkable thing. Now, it is true, and I suppose there is the obvious thing here of, Striking Distance Studios and Callisto Protocol. I think a game that honestly just should have been delayed more. I think it just needed more playtesting. I think they really, really could have had at least an 8 out of 10. If we're going to say that this is a 9 out of 10, I think the Callisto could have been an 8 out of 10, but just with a little bit more playtesting, a bit more time in the oven, and just ensuring that silly mistakes don't happen so that their launch is not what it was. Now, it is the truth, basically, that, yeah, it is the more graphically impressive game, but this still is a graphically impressive game. From John Lineman of Digital Foundry, and when you're talking about visual fidelity in games, Digital Foundry are the people that you go to. Per him, Dead Space is absolutely on par with the likes of Capcom's Resident Evil remakes. That is absolutely what any fan of this game would want to hear. Now, ultimately, it is a remake of a 2008 game, right? There are things that it won't have because times have changed. It doesn't have that novelty. But overall, the best of that experience is back. The way that I like to think about a good remake is you think about what a game was like in your mind's eye as a younger person, right? And you think back to that now, and you kind of have this bizarre HDification because your memory really preserves it all perfectly. I think the best remasters are able to capture that and deliver it to a new audience, which is why I am impressed, and I think there's no higher praise than the original art director, Ian Millen, of Dead Space 2008, saying, "It's like seeing the game I imagined years ago. It's yours now." I mean, that is the absolute passing of the torch in the best way possible. John Carpenter. I mean, John Carpenter, what else needs to be said? You gotta check out his work. I mean, goddamn. Do that. You owe it to yourself. Fan of the series. For anybody who enjoys the horror genre, this is, absolutely incredible. Now, that being said, look, there are a few issues, right? There are a few issues. We're still sitting at an 89 on Steam, which is incredible. I mean, a 27K or 28K, pretty much 29K all-time peak. See, for a single-player game, that is seriously impressive, right? That's really, really good. There have been some issues, though. Shader compilation, how many times have we heard that? Some people are seeing some of their issues with world streaming fixed with DLSS, because I imagine you just, notch the resolution down and allow NVIDIA Magic to bring it back up again and things are just okay. Some people are blaming things on Denuvo, which is obviously not really a reach given Denuvo's track record. And there have been some issues, right, with some key items not spawning in the correct place, which is obviously a problem, can lead to some soft locks, which have happened. There have been issues as well on the PS5 and the PC with variable rate shading. VRS, right, in dark areas. John, of course, as Digital Foundry would do, was able to find that. But per EA, who have actually taken to Reddit to fill people in, they are working on a fix. And what is quite fun about this game is quite open development. This is something that's inspiring to me, given, of course, we're a game studio. Our game's coming out in about 3 weeks, which is absolutely goddamn terrifying. Links down below. But as we get more resources, I mean, the idea of being more open with development, more open with the community is absolutely what you would want to do. And I think here we see a great example of a AAA company being able to do that. And it's rather shocking that some of this is coming from EA, because if you take a look at Skate actually has a form of open development going on. Again, this is not what you expect from EA. I mean, here we actually have grey box levels being shown off. That's really interesting. And actually, one thing that's quite interesting, you don't want to show off the middle ground. You don't want something that somebody could uncharitably think looks like the finished game. So it's actually safer to show off grey box. And certainly a hell of a lot safer than, showing off things that you don't think, well, that you might not be able to ship in terms of graphical fidelity. Again, something we've seen a lot. But in a world where I think people can be worried about bullshots, they can be worried about a trailer that doesn't look like the final thing, it's nice to actually get these glimpses into development. I think that does show an honesty that people do command. So beautiful grey box with barely a texture in sight. So sort of situation, it's not early access, right? So they're not doing that in terms of business model. And look, early access can be right in many cases for indies, and also for games where you do want a degree of community collaboration. Take Darkest Dungeon 2, right? I mean, the whole relationship system between your characters, for some people, that's really great. For other people, that's too much complexity to the point where they don't feel like they've got control over the game. That's a really, really good example of early access being used to hone in a game with its community, and that, in the case of Hades, obviously did result in an amazing Game of the Year tier product. So this isn't EA doing early access, but a really good example is them showing off some sound effects. And basically the story goes, right, they show off sound effects, they ask for community feedback, and well, they got a little bit of backlash. So suffice to say, there was, people being a little bit mad about the change. A lot of negative feedback. And I think in a world where people are used to not being listened to, when they're used to all of this purely being marketing, you can see why that more backlash-ish sort of thing could happen. But what we actually see is what they're able to then turn into marketing. And again, that is how this is a pretty damn savvy way to market your game. Things you did, shared feedback on our plasma cutter and pulse rifle. Things we did, listen and made modifications. And there you go, the modifications are there and it's brilliant. Now, all of that being said, unfortunately, everybody, it still is the current year, and because of that, new video games from, AAA, they do cost $70. What I would say here is, I think you're pretty safe to purchase this game later, right? I mean, it's Dead Space. You could actually play Dead Space now, the original one. It's still brilliant. So there's a degree of choice here, and it's not like the original version has been delisted or anything rough like that has happened. It's basically $70. Is that value proposition worth it to you? And that just depends on things. For me, I think this is a brilliant game. I have so fond memories of it, and that I get to share that and experience a fully modernized version in the way we were able to with Resi 2, and I suppose Resi 4, I guess, soon. That to me is going to be worth, I suppose, the regional equivalent in pounds. But if it's not worth that to you, don't worry. You'll be able to pick this game up for less money in the future. Right? And you'll be just fine. And another nice touch too that I suppose is in line with a lot of modernizations is the accessibility features. And again, look, this may not mean a lot to you, but there are other people who it does mean something to, right? I mean, look, see, as an example, having content warnings, upcoming section contains depictions of self-inflicted death. And I know that a lot of people might roll their eyes at that sort of thing. I would just say, empathize with somebody who's had a tragedy in their life that has got to do with this. Let's give them the option. And if that means that they can still experience this game if they want to, then that's actually a brilliant thing, This is not accessibility come at the expense of other things, right? So I think when they are able to do that, it absolutely is a good thing. And I suppose we're in this world where AAA, they have the time and the resources to do things like this. And you may say, well, how do so many games come out like weird rushed messes, but there's still time to do accessibility features? Well, I think I'd generally say if you look at the games that have really been leading the charge in this, they're games that have came out really polished, that have evidently been delayed until they were ready. Right, so I suppose, in a way, being able to have the nice-to-haves, right, being able to have the dessert, being able to have the meal with the seasoning the chef intended, rather than, the quickly microwave version that some publishers end up being okay shitting out, it means you do get to have these nice things. That can broaden the market of these games, it can introduce more people to genres. It is just a good thing for games as a medium. So, this really is just an incredible situation, and like with the Hi-Fi Rush video that Matt did last week, I always want to be able to bring you good stories when I can, because, look, we are very self-aware as an organization, and when we take a look at just all the videos up on our channel, yeah, we know things can lean in a direction, and that's why it's important to do things like this. Now, as for what's next, well, that's where I get interested, because just look at Capcom. Look at Capcom! They brought Resident Evil back. Now, look, I know that Resident Evil was always there. It didn't go away. But, look, when you got a Resi 5, Resi 6, stuff like that, people start to be way less down, on the genre. And while that absolutely is true that, man, the Resident Evil television show is really, really, really bad. And the Resident Evil movies are... at least we can watch the Red Letter Media crew almost die of laughter reacting to them. So I suppose, yeah, the Resident Evil movies are totally worth it. And you've got that weird Resident Evil. It looks like a sort of Unreal Engine animation, and oh boy, that's a weird looking thing. So yes, I think Capcom have sort of transmedia narrative-wise, it's bizarre. The Resi movies still seem to be watched, even though you could sort of critically say that they've screwed the pooch every single time. But they've been able to revitalize that brand, and that means that, I think fans of the horror genre are just getting so much more right now. So I suppose the hope then is, could we get more Dead Space? Could Dead Space actually be back? That is what I am really fascinated in here. Could Dead Space be back in a way where EA won't totally cock it up? And I actually think that answer could be yes, because evidently there is a market for games that don't take the piss. Look at Capcom. Again, their games don't take the piss. They're really good. And in the way that you have the likes of, Square Enix, they make these big AAA games and they have these insanely lofty sales expectations such that, remember the headline years ago that everybody clowned on? It was like, the Tomb Raider game sold stupidly well, but it didn't sell the crazy millions that Square Enix really wanted, so they considered it an underperformance. This idea of cost-controlled games with a solid production that just get out there and are good and make their money back on their box sales without having to resort to bullshit. I suppose that's the thing. If everything has got to be some crazy franchise tentpole live service, those are expensive bets, right? And a lot of them are going to fail. It's good to have safe bets that are really, really good, like this. And in a way, it is a safer bet. One of the things that kills game development is the good old unknown, right? It's the pothole in the road that you can't see and you don't know that it's coming, and oh dear, shit's hit the fan, now we've got to reboot the project. Take a look at a game, the most recent modern example is Forspoken. From what we know per insiders, that is a game with multiple internal reboots, which results in something that I think could have been a significantly better game coming out as really not the game that it could have been. And one of the things that really does, I think, help a company here is the lack of unknown unknowns. Because you're making Dead Space. You know what Dead Space is. And I suppose when I look at Blizzard and Warcraft 3 Reforged, it's like, come on, guys. You didn't have those unknown unknowns. How did you manage to cock it up that badly? And I suppose it's the same thing when you look at Ubisoft, of course, with, that Prince of Persia remake, which, I don't know, maybe we'll get that. Some decade, who knows, it's Ubisoft, they just cancel everything. And that's where it gets weird about EA, right? Because EA, stuff has been pretty down on them. I love Battlefield, I've been playing Battlefield since, originally it was playing Vietnam in a LAN center. I've loved Battlefield, and man, they've, things have went needlessly astray quite a lot with that franchise. That saddened me quite greatly. But I look at, and this is, I do look at 2042. They're bringing the classes, the class stuffs back. They've made loads of changes to loads of the maps. They're not abandoning the game. And, they have Zempel, they have a lot of top people trying to rehab that. You look at BioWare. Evidently, they know they need to take their time and actually get things right. You then look at Need for Speed Unbound. Hey, they chose a more stylized direction. They didn't go with the safe bet. And I know it's a game with issues, but that's interesting. You've got everything Apex is doing, most notably including the recently delayed Jedi Survivor, but worry not, it was just delayed from March to April, I believe, so I think likely just fixing last-minute issues rather than anything super crazy. You now look at Dead Space. You look at the EA Originals stuff that's been going quite well. You take a look at Deep Space and Skate having this sort of community openness model. I wonder, could that be applied in the future to Battlefield, perhaps? The Mass Effect Legendary Edition, that helped get that franchise back. It's just interesting. It does seem that EA realized that a lot was cocked up. I think they've realized that. So it's weird. Here we are. But it still is 6 years after Visceral was killed, And that still does sting. But ultimately, we found ourselves to a pretty good place. And we now live in a world where Dead Space existing as a franchise is more likely than ever. Because I think a lot of us knew that it was dead even before Dead Space 3 came out, when they announced that they were going to be doing things the way that they were doing them. But perhaps we're in a position now where, maybe the industry's just a bit more wise. In a world where they're happy to release single-player Star Wars games that don't take the piss. That's a lot better than the very cynical, frustrating side of gaming that we've had for quite some time. So I'm totally here for it. And look, we raked Anthem over the coals. But when a big company does a win, we got to praise it for doing a win. Right? That's what we've got to do as a community. When there's bad stuff, we say no, but we cannot let us saying no, because let's be real. I know, sometimes it's fun when there's a big new drama, and we can all talk about remember the infamous jacket merch from Fallout 76? Yeah, that's fun. But we can't lose ourselves in that cynicism and in that anger. We have to understand that our cynicism, the very root of it, comes from a place of loving games. And comes from being, the optimist who was scorned. So we still need to let our optimist come out every now and then when stuff like this happens. These games that are actually deserving of that. So there you go. Check it out if you feel that the launch pricing is something that you're okay with. If not, put it on your wish list. And if you want, a cozy, spooky game over next Christmas, then hey, I think this is one to put in your list. That's it for me. If you would like that sort of thing, like The Pale Beyond, I always envisioned it as a game you could play, over a few rainy days and get uber immersed. That's the game that we're making. It's coming out the 24th of February. I'd appreciate it if you checked out our launch trailer, which we'll link down below, or of course checked out the game itself on Steam and added it to your wish list, which really does help us out. Other than that, though, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.